Hi there, my name's Mac, and I'm a huge fan of really any kind of story, but today I wanted to focus on books. Really, I wanted to do a book review for my first video, but I got frustrated while trying to do that, so I took a step back and we're doing something else, which is I want to talk about all the books I read in 2025. Now, full disclaimer here, there is no shame in how many or how few books you read in a year. Like, honestly, even if you just read articles throughout the year, as long as you're reading something, that is a positive thing. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I did read 38 books this year, give or take. I am terrible at keeping track of my stuff. I keep track of what I read throughout the year, both on my own personal spreadsheet and on Goodreads, and somehow I still didn't put all the books I read this year. I figured that out while grabbing them all here. So yeah, give or take a couple because I've missed some, and also some of these are combinations of a bunch of books, and I'm lazy. So instead of putting down each individual one, I just put the whole thing. I'm gonna only try and spend like a minute or two talking about each one of these, because if I spend more than that on every single book, we're gonna be here for over an hour, and I don't have that amount of time before my wife gets home. So we're starting off strong. The first book I read for 2025, I can't find it anywhere. I don't know where it is. I might have gotten rid of it. It's entirely possible. But the first one I read was called The Nazi Conspiracy by Brad Meltzer and Josh Mensch. I'm not typically a nonfiction reader. I try to be. I really do. I'm like an adult. I'm an adult. I should read some nonfiction every once in a while, and I really, most of the time, I cannot force myself to do it. But this is a rare instance where I did read it. The Nazi Conspiracy is about the real life conspiracy that happened during World War II to kill the big three, right? Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt while they were meeting. I liked the book okay. I was interested because I don't know much about World War II history. There are a couple. Sorry, my cat is messing with the printer because he's a menace. There were a couple of interesting events that I hadn't known about. Like, I was not aware of just the sheer amount of casualties Russia suffered during World War II. I didn't know that the Middle East was kind of like neutral territory during World War II. My big complaint about the book is it does a lot in the way of like narrativizing these historical events. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that it doesn't really have any conclusion. We take these real historical events and these things that we know that happen based on documentation and, interviews and such, but then we don't give it a narrative conclusion because there is none, right? There was not, this plot to kill the big three. One, it was never, obviously it didn't work. They didn't assassinate the big three, and it never even was attempted. So it feels like there's no real closure at the end of it. But like I said, there's some interesting historical events to read about in there. So the second book I read for 2025 is The Yellow Sign by Robert W. Chambers. This is another one where it's a bit of a misleading thing to put down because this is technically a collection of Chambers' short stories, which out of, I believe there are 5 in this collection, only 3 of them are that kind of supernatural horror that you expect from the story where the Yellow King comes from, which I guess I should back up. Most people, maybe not. I feel like the Yellow King is a cultural idea in the same way that like the creatures, like Cthulhu creatures, chthonic creatures are, where they kind of exist in our culture, but their origin is a little bit muddied. Most people haven't actually read the story they come from. Hi, Editing Mac here. I just wanted to clarify what I meant. The King in Yellow is referenced in a lot of our media, and I just wanted to give a couple examples real quick. So Signalis has a lot of inspiration from the story and even shows up a couple of times in the game. This excellent Minecraft ARG is kind of ends with the King in Yellow. That video is great and you should check it out anyways. Apparently the first season of True Detective has a lot to do with that, incorporates a lot of the story in there. Sucker for Love, which is a visual novel romance sim where you can date the Kraken and the King in Yellow and a couple others. And apparently the podcast Malevolent, a lot of its center story revolves around the King in Yellow. So that's just a couple of examples. There's a lot more like books and stuff that actually references it, but there's just a couple of examples. The thing to know about this is that 3 of these short stories revolve around this futuristic world. It's kind of dystopian. It's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, there's gleaming palaces everywhere, and also we installed suicide booths, and we're sweeping homeless people off the streets. So, you know, it's not really a utopia if you're doing all that, right? It revolves around this play that has been completely banned. It's completely illegal in every country, and yet people keep finding it into their hands. And when you read the play, people tend to go crazy. It kind of goes back and forth as to whether this Yellow King is a real entity or not. But certainly the effect the play has on people is real. And those 3 short stories are really interesting to watch Robert Chambers walk that line between like what are we seeing is real and what is these people losing their minds, especially in the first story, The Repairer of Reputations. It's also really interesting, this doesn't actually have anything to do with the book, but Robert W. Chambers, these three short stories, The Repairer of Reputations, The Mask, and The Court of the Dragon, those are the only like horror-esque short stories he ever wrote. He mostly was concerned with writing like romances. And like, you know, he was writing this in the early 1900s, so that was pretty common. It's like he just wrote, you know, his normal romance short stories and long form stories, and then he dropped 3 horror short stories that defined a genre. I mean, these directly influenced what's his name? What is his name? Lovecraft. These stories directly influenced Lovecraft to write, you know, Cthulhu and books like that. Chambers wrote 3 genre-defining short stories and then moved on and kept writing romances and never went back to that genre ever again. Okay, so I'm about to cover 7 books that I read this year, which is the entirety of what's out so far for the Dungeon Crawler series. This is such a good series. I highly recommend it. It's funny because my dad recommended it to me, and usually, like, when my dad recommends me something to read, it becomes untouchable, and I won't read it. I don't know why I'm like that, because every suggestion he gives me is a fantastic book. Obviously, he read over 100 books last year. He knows what he's talking about. But I told him, if you buy me the first book, I will read it. And he did, and I have read all 7 that are currently out. And I should point out, these last 3, they're not the last 3, the series is ongoing, but these most recent 3, these guys are in the 700 to 800 ballpark in terms of page count, and I cleared all of them, each one, in less than a week. They're just very fantastic. I sing their praises to everyone I can, because it's just weird and it's fun. If you like D&D, definitely like any kind of nerdy medieval dungeon crawl stuff, you'll like this. The plot basically centers around Carl, who is a normal guy who, on one very specific night, his cat Donut jumps out the window, and when he goes to get her, the aliens come and they flatten the entire world, and anyone who is in a building at that moment dies. And everyone who's left on the surface of the planet has the choice to either hang out on the surface where there is no longer anything, or to delve underground where a dungeon is being built that will be broadcast to the entire galaxy as a sort of game show. There is so much more. Like that, even just that initial setup is obviously a lot. And it gets so deep and there's so much going on. It's like, I don't think my wife likes it when I talk about plot points in these, because it takes me like 20 minutes to tell her one plot point because I have to keep going back and add more context. Just because like everything is layered so perfectly, you don't even realize how much exposition, how much layering, and how much world building you're getting until you sit down and try to tell it to someone who hasn't read it. But I adore these books. I should also mention very early on in the first book, Carl's cat Donut, who joins him down into the dungeon, eats a pet biscuit and becomes sentient. And she has better stats than Carl does, and so she's party leader. And she is my favorite character. She is one of the two main characters in this series, and she is so well written. I obviously Matt Dinniman knows cats very well because her body language is written exactly like a cat. I picture it perfectly. But also, she's just a very well done character, her and Carl both. So, this might look like a daunting stack of books, and it kind of is. But I promise it's one of those ones that you fly through it because it is just so. It's just so good. It's hard to put down, and the pacing is really good. I would say the first two books are good, but for me personally, I got really into it by book 3 because that's where I feel like the pacing and the humor really nails down, and it's just consistent from there on. So, highly recommend these guys. All right, next book I'm talking about is Ella Minnow P, which, to tell you, this is Ella as in the name, minnow as in the fish, and then P as in the vegetable. Not knowing that made this book very difficult to Google initially. I read this for my little book club I have with my friends. A friend was the one who said we should read it, and it is so good. Obviously you can see this is a very breezy read, especially considering the stack of dungeon crawler books I just talked about. This book is fantastic. It's written in epistolary form, so it's almost entirely letters going back and forth between the main characters. The plot of this book is the main characters live on an island where a guy who, what did he do? That's what it was. The guy who invented the sentence that has all of the letters in it. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. The guy who invented that. So they have a sign that has all those letters and that sentence on them, and the letters start falling off the sign. And instead of thinking the sign just needs to be replaced, the leaders of this town take it as like divine providence that means they can't use those letters anymore. So as the book goes on, the main characters communicating via letter have to continuously get more creative with how they write because they're losing more and more letters as they go. And it just makes for such an interesting read. There's so many different layers to this. Like, if nothing else, the writing alone is impressive because yeah, the characters have to do it, but so does Mark Dunn, who wrote the book. Because when we get to like near the end here, like it is almost impossible to read because there's so many letters missing. It's just it gets so difficult. It's like trying to read Shakespeare where you almost have to read it out loud yourself to figure out what they're trying to say. It's very short, it's very fun. I like this book a lot. Okay, the next books I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about two of them, and that is Spy Family Volume 14 and Spy Family Volume 15. And what a pair to read in the same year together. Okay, number one, I really do enjoy reading manga. You can't see it, but I have a huge stack of like the Trigun mangas over there. This is not the only manga I'll be talking about in this video, but these were two excellent volumes. If you don't know, if you live under a rock, Spy Family is about a spy named Twilight who is given the task of building a fake family to blend in so that he can get close to a specific target to keep a war from breaking out between the East and the West. To do this, he ends up adopting a girl named Anya who, unbeknownst to him, is a telepath and can read minds. So she knows immediately that he is a spy and that this is all for a fake family. And then he ends up attaining a fake wife named Yor, who is secretly an assassin. And none of them know about each other except for Anya. So the first half of this, I mean, in general, this is a very fun series. It's silly, it's fun, it has some really great heartfelt moments to it. And if you're not into manga, I think the anime, I haven't watched the newest season, but I think the anime's pretty much caught up to the books at this point. And I would recommend either one. The anime is gorgeous. It has great music and great voice acting. But towards the second half of this series, it's kind of it's let the comedy and humor kind of take a back seat. It's not gone completely, but it's definitely not as much of a focus as it was in the earlier volumes. We definitely start to move into more serious questions, because in the world of Spy Family, there have already been 2 past wars involving the East and the West. That's why they're trying to prevent a third one from happening. And so, our main characters who are adults, like Twilight and Yor, were kids, or, well, they weren't kids, but, their parents and grandparents were around for the first war, and then they were young adults, well, teenagers to young adults in the second. So it kind of turns into this more mediation on, like, how do you give a normal future to your child when you yourself didn't have that normalcy growing up, right? There's a lot of thoughts of, like, oh, neither Twilight or Yor have living parents. They both died because of stuff going on with that war. And like the realization that, oh, Anya doesn't have any grandparents. This is probably a good thing to let her become friends with the elderly couple who moves in next door. And we get a lot more perspectives of different adult characters and how, like, the politics and the past wars affect them. And it's just really good. I eat it up. And these 2 volumes are fantastic because they are 2 halves of the same story. These 2 characters, which is that's the wrong book, the headmaster of Anya's school, Henry, and Anya's best friend, Becky, her, not maid, but the woman who's usually taking care of her and running her around. And about how they met as children, and, she goes off to war and all sorts of stuff, and it's such a good story. It's excellent. If you haven't caught up with the manga, I would highly recommend snagging these 2 when you can. I talked about Spy Family for a while. I love Spy Family. I thought this was going to take me a long time, but I keep grouping the books up together, so maybe it won't take that long. But both of these are by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read The Dispossessed and The Left Hand of Darkness, which are both excellent sci-fi novels and really interesting mediations on things that are comparable to our real world. The Dispossessed is about a man named Shevek, who is from a moon outside of the main planet. Basically, these 2 cultures have been completely separated for a couple of decades because of, it's been a while since I read it, but I believe it's because there was a sort of, like, political unrest, and so the people who had the opposing political belief made a deal so that they could basically go colonize this moon, where life is a lot harder. It's not as easy for food and things like that. So a lot of, like, people get assigned jobs that they need. Everyone's kind of working together to make sure they all survive. And, the book does a good job of showing you how that is a positive thing and can work out, and also the places where that starts to crack, and, the different pitfalls that are involved with that. But the story involves Shevek going back to the main planet to make contact with the other cultures that are still there. Mostly because he has a scientific discovery and he wants to see who he should actually share this with. But this is kind of guised as him just being a tourist almost. But the cultures on the planet are definitely more akin to our capitalistic structure here in the real world. And so it's a bit of a culture shock going both directions. But it's a very fun mediation on different structures and how we communicate through different cultures and things like that. The other one that I read was Left Hand of Darkness, and this one was excellent as well. I actually think I enjoyed this one a bit more than The Dispossessed. But Left Hand of Darkness is another one where we have someone from a different planet making contact with a new culture. On this planet, there is no real sexual dimorphism, so all the people don't really have man and woman. It's just all one gender. that kind of goes through a heat/mating cycle. So there is no sexual prejudice, there's no sexism, uh, there's not even a concept of like homosexuality or anything like that because everyone's the same. Very fascinating. I really enjoy the way Ursula K. Le Guin does her world building. And definitely reading these two. I want to find more of her books in the coming year and read more of them because they're just really cool. I really love the way that she uses sci-fi as a way of talking about current issues, right? Because that's what sci-fi is always about, right? We throw ourselves into the far-flung future and we exaggerate current problems that we have now as a way to discuss them. And I think she does a really interesting job of both accomplishing that to a certain degree, but also just making a cool sci-fi world and exploring what the implications of it are. All right, the next one we have is A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This is a fantastic book, and I feel like I'm repeating myself because I've said that for every book, but this really does, like, this is a book above the rest, genuinely. Although, quick caveat, this is not my copy of the book. This is my wife's copy, which she accidentally stole from a high school English teacher of ours. So, Ms. Diamande, if you ever see this video, we're sorry, but this book is very good. So, thank you for the copy. If you haven't read this book, genuinely, you should. 100%, it is excellent. I was going to tell you what it's about, but I can't remember any of the specifics because I did read this back in April. My memory is terrible. Legitimately, I can't remember the year or where it takes place. But I will tell you that this is in the Middle East during times of upheaval. I believe it's like the 80s. So, you know, we start, I believe we start with the Russians, the ones in charge, and then we go through a period of when they get pushed out, and then, you know, you get the Taliban that comes and takes over after that. But the story follows two different women. We have Miriam and Lila. So Miriam is a much older woman than Lila, and she basically starts out with a rough hand. She's kind of an illegitimate child of her father, and so she's not given the same attention and resources. And when her mom dies, she basically gets sold off to a much older man as a way of just getting rid of her. And then the other girl, Lila, is much younger than Miriam. She's probably only about, I think she's only about 15 when the Taliban comes in. But through a lot of tragedies, she ends up marrying the same man that Miriam has been with for the last, 20 or 30 years. And it's the story about how both of them have ended up in those positions and what they do together to deal with both the horrific world going on outside and the horrific world going on inside with their abusive husband. Genuinely a fantastic book. Like I said, I've read this before. I don't usually go back and reread books, but this one, even now, I could go back and reread it a third time. Now we have Hound of Bakersville and Valley of Fear by Arthur Conan Doyle. I've already read this one before 2025. I believe I read it back in 2022. I have oh, you can't see it. I've got a collection. They were a Christmas present. I love mystery novels. I love detective stories. It's a natural thing for me to have. But I went back and read this one because I knew I was wanting to read Agatha Christie later in the year, and so I wanted to kind of keep in my mind how Doyle writes. And honestly, these two are pretty good. I actually like Valley of Fear better, but Hound of Bakersfield isn't bad. I do enjoy Sherlock Holmes sometimes. It is fun to read the books because he's not nearly as much of a cold asshole as he's usually portrayed on the screen. But he is purely concerned with the physical evidence going on with the case. And I run up to this issue a lot, which is I like to try and solve the mystery as the story's going. I like trying to figure it out myself. And some things are really good at letting you do that, and some are not. and these books are not good at that. It's just like I get frustrated when the detective knows information that was never given to me. So it's like, how am I supposed to figure it out? I'm the real detective here. Both of these books are pretty good. I do like Valley of Fear more, but that's mostly because Doyle likes to do this thing where he spends the first 2/3 of the book actually doing the Sherlock Holmes mystery, and then the last third is just all backstory on either the murderer or the guy who was killed. And it always seems like he was more excited to write that part than the Sherlock Holmes mystery, which could be true. I mean, I know the reason why he like killed off Sherlock Holmes at one point is because he was tired of writing him, so that could be true. These were both interesting stories. Not my favorite of the year. I did like Valley of Fear. I actually think that one would make a pretty interesting miniseries, but that's all I gotta say about that one. I also read the Legend series by Marie Lu this year. This was not my first time reading the series. I actually read it back when I was in high school, and it was actually a series that me and a close friend bonded over really early in our friendship. So he did buy me like a box set of the Legends series, and I did finally get around to reading them. You might notice I don't have them with me, and that's because that same friend and I traded so that I could read this newer fourth book and he could read those three. And I only realized once I went to do this video that he hasn't given them back to me, and he probably hasn't read them yet. So I'm not gonna name names, but you know who you are. But the main reason why I did that was because I learned about this book here, which was Rebel. This one's actually a pretty recent book in the series, and it's kind of like a epilogue. So this was really the only reason why I went back and reread the series. But the series itself is excellent. It's kind of a typical like dystopian teens fight back against an oppressive government with extreme social and class divisions. And it's good. I like it a lot. Basically, the series is about a more street rat character named Day, who spends most of his time stealing food and also being a huge rebel and stealing things from the government. He's kind of a wanted criminal, actually. And the other main character is June, who is like a high achieving, like top of her school, golden child of the Republic. And her brother is part of the army. The big inciting incident of this book is that Day is stealing a bunch of medicine for his family, and the theft doesn't go perfectly, and he ends up getting injured. But he also runs into June's brother, Tobias. Fuck, is that his name? He does not kill the brother, and yet when June is notified later, she learns that her brother was killed in the incident. And so in unraveling this mystery of what actually happened to her brother, she realizes that Day is innocent, and innocent in more than just the murder of her brother. And so she ends up deflecting from the Republic, and her and him both try to change things for the better. I'll say my absolute favorite part, I believe this is in the second book. The United States, the whole world is a like post-climate disaster. So the United States is pretty much only occupying the southeastern part, if I believe. I think I'm right. There's not a map on here, but I'll put it on the screen. So you have the Republic and then the colonies of America. And Day and June are both from the Republic. The whole time in the first book, they're talking about like, we should escape to the colonies, things are better there. Because the Republic is like a martial law, military dictatorship kind of situation going on, and the colonies, well, we don't know exactly what's going on, but supposedly it's better. There's this fantastic twist when they finally break over into the border of the colonies, and they find out that it's kind of the same amount of bad, just in a different way, because the colonies are like hyper corporatized capitalistic society, and so like, you know, your every breath is taxed, and the police are not going to come to your door unless you pay them, and that kind of stuff. And it's just a great moment that kind of turns the story on its head, where it's like, oh no, things are kind of rough everywhere, so maybe we should stick where we are and try to make things better. That series is good. This wrap-up book was pretty good. This is actually about Day's younger brother, who is present in the original series, but it centers him, and we also get a little bit of Day and June rekindling their old romance. It's fun. I didn't like it as much as the original series, but it is nice to see these characters a little bit older and a little bit more experienced, and just kind of getting a nice like wrap up epilogue to the story. I reread Catch 22 this year. It's still a fantastic book that is weird and wacky. The first time I read this book was for a summer project for high school, and I waited until the last minute. So when I first read this book, probably the last fourth of it, I skimmed while listening to the audiobook on like 7 times speed because I needed to finish it that night. So rereading it was nice because I got to take my time. It's a very silly book with some very excellent moments that are very not silly at all. It walks a really tight line between being funny and also being able to pump the brakes and give you a solid emotional moment in the middle of all that. The book centers around Yossarian, who is a fighter pilot during World War II, but it's just about the absurdity of war and the absurdity of what they're doing. The whole thing, the Catch-22, refers to the fact that if you're insane, you should be grounded and not allowed to fly. But if you claim that you're insane and you don't want to go fly, then you're obviously not insane because it's not crazy to not want to die up there in the sky. So you're obviously sane, so you're getting on that plane. So the whole book is full of kind of contradictions like that, and that's the whole thing. This is one of those books that I would love to see. I was about to say I would love to see it turned into a show, but it does occur to me that my copy of the book has a sticker on it that says there's a Hulu show. So maybe I should check that out. Pride and Prejudice. I always try to read a couple of classics throughout the year, and this was one of them for this year. I really enjoyed this book, even though the language was a little bit difficult to get through. I got to a point where I was kind of rolling with it and I understood, but I know people wouldn't have as easy of a time with it. I personally have an English degree, and I spent most of that degree focused on classical literature. So this isn't like the craziest thing I've ever read, but definitely the language is a little bit difficult. But it's an excellent book. It's a classic for a reason. Jane Austen is a great writer. I mean, I always think of that one review for it where it's like, it's just a bunch of people going to different houses and talking. And like, yeah, that is what happens. It's about Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy, Mr. Darcy, falling in love after initially hating each other's guts. It's kind of like the original enemies to lovers a little bit. Darcy starts as an asshole, and she kind of starts hating him, and then as things go on, they realize they were wrong about each other, and they actually really like each other. Like I said, it's a classic for a reason. If you don't want to deal with the wording, I believe it's the 2008 remake of it with Keira Knightley playing Elizabeth Bennet. That one's pretty good. It's a little bit on the slower side, but excellent scenes. Funny thing is, I read this at the same time that a friend of mine got really, really into the movie Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So it was kind of perfect timing. And if I could give you a movie rec, I would recommend Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. It's kind of ridiculous and silly and campy, but if you're into like gory, campy movies, it's pretty good. And some very interesting world building and such. This is another one that kind of fucks with my list, because this is a collection of all 5 of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. With Hitchhiker's Guide, the first 2 books are excellent. The first 2 being Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Those 2 are really good books. The third one, Life, the Universe, and Everything, wasn't as good. Felt very meandering and like we didn't know where we were going with the story. And then So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, that one's pretty good. The only thing is, like, when you read these books in a collection like this, it really gets grating, the humor. And like, I am a big fan of like that dry British humor style, and I did think the first 2 books were funny, but man, by the time I got to 3 and 4, I was like, I am so sick of this reading. It's another one where there's a lot going on and it's hard to explain it all. It's mostly about Arthur Dent, who's like the most normal British man, ending up going to space because he inadvertently was friends with an alien when the world ended. And so this alien friend, who I totally remember the name of, Ford Perfect, his friend Ford Perfect kind of plucks him out just before the world gets destroyed, and then they go on galactic adventures. and a lot of stuff happens, and it is funny, and you probably enjoy it, but I don't recommend reading them all back to back to back to back like I did, because it does get grating. I am a huge fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Number one, jot that down. So 2 books that I read this year was The Dawn of Yang Chen and The Legacy of Yang Chen, both of which are by F.C. Yee, which I believe the year before last, 2024, I read the Kyoshi books, and those ones are excellent as well. But these ones are really fun, and I really hope they get F.C. Yee in to write more. Let me read about every Avatar, please. I'll do it. I'll read about all of them. They're all fun. These 2 are purely about Yang Chen's journey as the Avatar, and about how she kind of has a fairly unique circumstance compared to other avatars, which is she is way more sensitive to those past lives and sometimes loses track of herself to those memories. It's definitely more of like a political thriller than like the Kyoshi books are. But it is very interesting, and it does some fun like world building for historical stuff in Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I did like the Kyoshi books better, but I'm biased because I'm gay and I like that Kyoshi's gay. So I don't remember if she's gay, but she's got Renki. She's got a girlfriend, and I like that. Also, those ones are very action packed and fun, and Kyoshi's kind of a badass. Yang Chen's a badass too, but she's in like a much more I don't want to say manipulative way, but she definitely likes to keep her cards close to the chest. She doesn't want people to know her next move before she makes it. But definitely, if you read the Kyoshi books and like those, give these ones a shot. And if you just like Avatar, I would say give all 4 books a shot because they're excellent. Oh, I almost skipped over this one. A book I don't recommend from this year. I only still have this book because I really want to make a video talking about it. This book sucked. This book is so bad. And this is an instance where I got tricked by Goodreads, because Goodreads gave it 3.6 stars, and I was like, well, that's pretty good. This book was so bad it killed my book club. The same book club that we read Element OP. We read this one afterwards. We haven't been able to get back on track with reading because this book was so bad. We all struggled to get through it. This is going to come off as me like utterly bashing this book, and I don't want that to be how it sounds, but I don't have another way to phrase it. So the writing is pretty amateurish. The timeline jumps all over the place, and it makes it a little confusing to follow. Also, it's written like the author, Dathan Arbok. It's written like he was writing this with like a thesaurus in front of him. There's a specific line. I have it highlighted, actually. The sentence is, I assume now that the genesis of the pile was more ordinary than we had hypothesized. Okay. Either one of those in a sentence by themselves would have been fine. To have them back to back like that is eyebrow raising, and also to be in a section where you're talking about how you as like a 6-year-old was thinking. You were not hypothesizing about the genesis of the trees. You were wondering where they came from. Like, you don't need to be that crazy about it. But in general, I did not care for this mystery. Like, from reading the back of the book, it sounds interesting, and there are parts of I think the best parts of the book are the ones that are seriously engaging with that mystery, but it doesn't feel very consistent, and the way it ends didn't make any sense to me, and I really don't understand what was going on. Like, my main, I'm going to give you this example, and that's all the last I'm going to talk about this book because I don't want to spend too long on it. But the first chapter is about the main character, like 5 or 6, waking up and finding himself in the middle of the woods at night and being lost and trying to find his way back home. When he gets back home, there's like a police officer there because his mom thought he ran away, because she finds a note that looks like somebody else wrote it trying to impersonate him. Which number one would a 6-year-old write a note? Anyways, we never get an explanation for that. It definitely seems like the main character has a stalker throughout the entire book, but no explanation as to, one, why he tried to kidnap him, because this would have been before most of the other stuff happens, and two, why he didn't actually kidnap him. Why would a stalker kidnap you and then leave you halfway in the woods and not take you all the way? It does. And then why would he kidnap your best friend instead? It doesn't make any sense, and I didn't like it. Catabasis. This is definitely not one everyone will like. This is kind of one of those books where you have to accept that you're not going to know what's going on for a little bit and be okay with it. Not nearly to the same extent as, like, Gideon the Ninth, but there is an element of that in here. The story basically revolves around the main character, Alice, as she ventures into hell, talk to her professor, who she may or may not have accidentally killed, and get her recommendation letter from him, since he died before she could get it. And she thinks she has no hope of getting a job in her field after she's done with her doctorate. She's also joined by Peter, who is kind of a academic rival, being the only other student that this professor had, but also they kind of have more of a history than that. But this book is very centered on, I guess, the horrors of academia, like of post-grad work, which my degree is only a bachelor's, so I can't speak to, but this book makes me terrified at the prospect of doing post-grad. I haven't even mentioned the fact that this shit's all about magic. There's so much other stuff going on. It is a fun read, and I really enjoyed it. And I will say, this is so off topic, I'm jealous, because I got this from a, where did I get this? I got this at a local book fair. And I saw it at Barnes & Noble like a week later with cool, like, edging around the side that I thought was gorgeous. And I was like, man, I'm glad that I gave it to a local bookstore instead of Barnes & Noble, but that version is so cool. This is very, like, dark academia kind of vibe. So if that's something you're interested in, I would highly recommend this book. It is a good time. Okay, so I recently discovered TJ Klune. Well, I guess not recently. I read In the Lives of Puppets last year, and I adored that book. I loved it. This year, I picked up The House in the Cerulean Sea and the sequel book, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And this book was so good. I loved it so much. I can't. This is probably my favorite book of the year, genuinely. There's a quote on the front of it. Quote, I loved it. It's like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket. Simply perfect. And that is accurate. That is what reading this book feels like. This book follows Linus, who is a social worker who reviews orphanages for magical children. And he gets sent on a special assignment to see this one that's got very powerful magical children in it, that's run by a man named Arthur. And initially, Linus is very by the book and like, you're not going to sway me. And then he starts to fall in love with Arthur and get to know these children. And it's fantastic. It's an excellent book. It's so sweet. There's a good amount of conflict in there, but not so much that you ever genuinely are like, oh no, is this going to have a bad ending? Am I going to feel sad at the end of it? It's just a delight. All the characters are so fun. Linus is so silly, and so is Arthur. And the children are probably my favorite part. There's like 6 of them. One of them's like a jellyfish type creature. One of them is the Antichrist. It's great. It's great. I can't recommend this book enough. And then I also have the sequel here. This one is more about them combating a J.K. Rowling type figure, which that's not my analogy. That is T.J. Klune's. He talks about it in the afterword in this book. But it is about them like fighting bigotry that they're facing. That's a little bit more analogous to what we face here today. And you know what? This is one that I got like the cool edges on. You can see that the sky and sea continue to the side. And I love that. It's such a minor detail and it does not matter, but I love it. But I I like this one, not as much as the first one, but I do feel like it's a good continuation. And I really hope TJ Klune writes a third one, just because I love watching Linus and Arthur and all the kids run around and be funny. It's fantastic. And I will say this year, I will definitely be reading The Bones Beneath My Skin. I actually have it on the shelf over there. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm really excited to read that one. Going Postal by Terry Pratchett. This is my first Terry Pratchett book. Okay, I have read Good Omens, to be fair, and I really enjoyed that one. But this is my first Terry Pratchett solo book, and holy shit, I wish I had read more sooner because it's hilarious. It's, I would say it's kind of reminiscent of the humor you see in The Hitchhiker's Guide. It's like kind of that more dry British humor, but this does not get grading. This is so fun and it's just so good. It's about a con man named Moist who ends up being forced to work as the postmaster for a defunct post office, and so he basically has to rebuild it from the ground up and take on the clacks, which is, I wasn't entirely clear. They're kind of like telegrams, I guess, like phone lines. I don't know. But this book was fantastic, and I'm definitely going to be reading more Discworld in the future. If you don't know, a bunch of Terry Pratchett's books all reside within the same fictional world of Discworld, which was really funny because when I picked this one up, I was like halfway through, and I was like, huh, I wonder if this is part of Discworld. And then I looked at the cover and saw says a novel of Discworld, so I was like, oh, okay. But I'll definitely be reading more of them in the future. It's very fun, and I wouldn't even say silly. Like, it's kind of silly, but it feels a little bit more highbrow than that most of the time. But I can't recommend this one enough. This one was excellent. I feel like I'm not I'm not being very specific. I'm just like, I loved it. That's how I read. I'm not as good at being critical when I read as I am with television. It's because I like reading too much. I've got What Kind of Paradise by Janelle Brown. This one is about a I should really read the back of these before I start trying to give a synopsis, because not a single time have I remembered the main character's name when I go to start talking. It's about a character named Jane, who lives off the grid in Montana with her father, and she basically like does not know nearly anything about the outside world. The most she sees is the closest town to them. She helps her dad. Number one, her dad brings in a computer at the turn of the century, which is confusing for her because he's always told her that technology is evil, but she helps him write down his manifest, which you might know where this is going with me saying the word manifest. But he basically drags her into this plot of his, and she ends up being an accessory to some domestic terrorism / murder. Since her dad goes in and kills a guy responsible for working on artificial intelligence because he thinks it is evil and bad. And this takes place in like the 90s. So, he's a little ahead of the curve. But what follows is Jane trying to slot herself into a normal life away from her father. And I did enjoy this book. It was a good read. I just feel like it's one of those books where I feel like the time frame needs to be adjusted, right? I don't want to just, because it starts a little bit before she gets involved in this crime, and we end with her turning her father in. Spoilers, sorry. And we get a little bit of epilogue. But I would have preferred to see more of her life after she turns in her dad. In the epilogue, it talks about how rough that time period was with her. She basically gets booted out of the life that she had built in those couple of months between the crime and turning her dad in, because, everyone knows now. And I really wish we could have seen more of that aspect of the story. I would have preferred to read about her trying to build a life for herself in this world where everybody knows who she is as, daughter of this crazy domestic terrorist. But all in all, it was pretty good. I didn't hate it. and I got through it fairly quickly. And I did like the setting. This is like pre-dot-com bubble, website and blog companies hiring people as fast as they walk in the door because you can do anything online and nothing's fallen apart yet. It's fantastic. I read this Agatha Christie collection. It's got 5 of her short stories in it. It's got Cards on the Table, Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, 13 at Dinner, and the ABC Murders. I almost remembered all of those. I might still make a review video for this one, but this was the book I was talking about that was getting me frustrated. So I might only focus on like the last 3 in this compilation. We'll see. So I won't say too much here, but I did enjoy this one. I definitely enjoy Hercule Poirot as a detective more than Sherlock, and I do prefer Agatha Christie's writing to Doyle's. I did enjoy the most of this compilation. I'm just not going to talk about it much because there's a video that I will be making on it. Okay, this is one that I actually forgot to put on my spreadsheet somehow, so technically it's 39 books. But this is Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. If you know the name Chuck Tingle, you might be confused and or surprised about this, but this is not erotica involving intangible ideas and items. This is a genuine narrative. Not to say that the other ones aren't genuine. I know Chuck Tingle is a very good writer. I've never read any of the silly ones. Like, what is it? I don't know. I'll throw up some of the, I know, like, there's Trans Wizard Harriet Porber or whatever. I'll throw up a couple of the covers on screen. But this is a genuine fictional narrative, and this is a really fun read. The story's about Misha, who's a writer in Hollywood, who starts being chased down by his own horror creations after he refuses to kill off his queer characters in his show. It's a pretty short read. It's fun. I like a lot of the ideas going on in this, especially just the idea of like enemies that Misha himself have written that are coming after him. They're very cool. And it also talks, we're kind of discussing that idea of like copyright in a way, where it's his own characters being used against him in the same way that, like, he doesn't have agency over the characters that they want him to kill off in his show, which we see a lot in the industry. I can think of a couple examples just with animation alone, where, these shows get canceled and then the people who created them can't do anything more with them, like, we could talk about Owl House with Dana Terrence or Infinity Train. Those shows are those people's creation, and they'll, well, never say never, but they probably won't be able to, do anything more with those characters because they belong to Disney and Cartoon Network respectively. But yes, this is a fun one. It's very, like, kind of playing on, like, 80s horror a little bit, and it does kind of have an interesting pivot near the 2/3 mark where we kind of move more in the sci-fi territory. But I would recommend it if you like horror. It's really a lighter horror. It's not too crazy. There is one very gory scene near the end, but otherwise it's not that bad. And I really enjoyed this one. All right, last one, the Love Bullet manga. This is just Love Bullet propaganda because I absolutely adore this series. You might remember this one because it blew up on, I believe, Twitter at the time, because this was a couple of years ago. But initially, it only came out with like a couple of chapters, and then they were talking about canceling it, and then a bunch of lesbians on Twitter rallied together and basically saved it. Love Bullet is about a girl named Koharu who dies before she gets to experience love for the first time, and so is kind of brought back to life as a Cupid by the goddess of love. And basically, if she pairs enough people together, she can get enough karma to be reborn and to basically have a second chance at life. It's fun. It's cute. There's the grenade launcher that takes heart-shaped grenades. It's great. I love the idea that instead of using bow and arrows, these Cupids are using modern weaponry. But it's just very cute. This is the first volume to be printed in English, which was very exciting for me because I hate reading manga online. If you like, I don't even think I said it. This is a GL. This is a girl love. So a lot of lesbians in this, which I love. I love seeing more lesbian manga come out. Still need to pick up a copy of, oh, what's it called? The guy she liked wasn't a guy at all. I think that's what it's called. It's the lime green looking one. That there's that one. There's She Loves to Cook, She Loves to Eat. Whisper Me a Love Song, which I have the first volume of, and I can't for the life of me find the second volume anywhere, and I don't want to buy it off Amazon. So that was my Love Bullet propaganda. Check it out so we get more Love Bullet, please. And that was all the books I read for 2025. It was quite a bit. I didn't expect to be recording for over an hour. Oops. But if you've read any of these books, let me know. If you have any recommendations for things I should read in the future, I'd love to hear it. I do want to do more, not just book reviews. I like any kind of story, so I love video games and movies, TV shows as well. So I would love to just talk about things I enjoy, talk about niche things that I enjoy that I think more people should like, maybe. But mostly just stories that I love. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.